Grandmaster Leo Giron. So let me just get to that. A little bit of background first. And for folks that are not familiar with the Philippines here is a map of the Philippines. The middle arrow is where Leo Giron is from. He is from Pangasinan. And thank you for maps today. He is from Bayambang, Pangasinan. And I also want to show an arrow at the very top where Grandmaster Tony is from. Not him, but his father. And that is in the Luwag area in the Ilocos. And then Master Joel, his family is originally from the Visayas, and the arrow at the very bottom shows that. So to get you all excited about this and in the mood, I'm going to show you a little short video presentation of what Filipino martial arts is like from a visual perspective. And this is the best one that I've seen. It is the arrival of Magellan, and Filipinos are actually going to repel the first attempt of colonization by the Spaniards. And in fact, for the next 40 years, the Spaniards would fail at colonizing the Philippines. So that's really important to mention because, you know, eventually the Spaniards will be successful. But here is a nice graphic of their first encounter.
Ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
So you can see the kind of bladed weapons and fighting arts that Filipino used. Magellan actually was killed by Filipinos, and the person that killed him was a Filipino chief by the name of Lapu-Lapu. Chief is the English translation, but I prefer the original Filipino term, and the term is datu. And then we'll get more into this later on. You know, for me, I got interested in all of this because of the galleons. Filipinos were sailors, navigators, shipbuilders, and soldiers. And, you know, we have a Pan-African Studies program here in California State University, Sacramento. And in fact, my colleague, Dr. Gautama Masupye is here with us, and you can just say hi. This is also nice to say that next month, actually, we have a very major conference on the Rwandan genocide here. And President Paul Kagame from Rwanda is actually coming over, courtesy of the work that Professor Gautama Masupye did. But, you know, why is this important? This is important because when Filipinos came into contact with the Spaniards, and when they came to what will be called the United States, the importance of it is that Filipinos actually, even though they're Asians, will share a much closer history with Africans. Like Africans, they will be an indigenous people that were brought to the Americas against their free will. You know, they didn't come here because they came freely. In fact, they were forced by the Spaniards to work on the galleons. I can't use the term slave because slavery at that time was abolished by the Spaniards. But they certainly were unfree labor. They were not being paid any wages and the like. So this is, for me, one of the most important vessels in Filipino history. This is a caracola. This is a Filipino warship. And it is about 70 feet long. So think from this corner to that corner and just a little bit more. There are about 200 warriors. Let me just take a quick peek here. There we go. There are about 200 warriors, and those warriors are called timawas. And it is those timawas that will practice the art of martial arts and weaponry. And it is from here that Filipino martial arts will find its origin. The leader of this caracoa is called a datu, and the datu is actually the captain of the ship. I already mentioned how long it is. It is very fast. It is 2 to almost 3 times as fast as the Manila galleons. So when the Spaniards came, they were very, very impressed with the speed of these caracoas, which outrun the galleons. And in fact, in 1565, when the final colonization of the Philippines will occur, and by the way, this colonization of the Philippines will be a predominantly Spanish crew from Manila. And the name of that colonization, the leader of that colonization group is Miguel Lopez y Legazpi. Legazpi saw the importance of the caracoas, and what he did is he took these caracoas. I'm just going to here it is. I'm just going to show it to you again. He took these caracoas and used them to colonize the Philippines. So even though the galleons was their main supply ship and it provides supporting fire from the cannons, it was from caracoas that, in fact, the colonization of the Philippines commenced. Okay. And I think the other most important thing is one of the earliest references to Filipinos in written history is by Chinese chroniclers. In Fukien, in the 12th century, this is off Chinese coast, the Chinese recorded that a group of quote-unquote Visayan warriors came and raided the coast of Fukien. The Visayan warriors wore tattoos, they were fierce, they were feared, and the Chinese were very, very irritated that they were raiding the coast of China. What's interesting is even though they're called Visayan, everything we know suggests that they're probably from Mindanao. So it's kind of interesting to see the misidentification there. I just want to show you that this is the front of the ship. It has a mast, and you see that there are 2 outriggers, and there are people paddling so that they don't really have to depend on steam power. And of course, this is a modern-day bangka for those of you who have been to the Philippines, and you can see that the design has been maintained. So just a little bit of history here, and Philippines is a seafaring society. This is why Filipinos became excellent sailors and excellent martial artists. And here I'm using martial artists not in the sense that you see in Hollywood, but people who knew how to fight, as it were. They were skilled sailors. In fact, the best theory suggests that the migration of people, of course, originated in Africa, went through the Mesopotamia area, through India, through China, and eventually through Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and from there they will build these kinds of vessels and go all the way to the South Pacific, like New Zealand, and all the way to Fiji, Tonga, and the like, and all the way to French Polynesia until they finally end up in Hawaii. And I have some interesting clips to show you regarding that. The vessels were seaworthy vessels. They crossed oceans. And I already explained to you the migration from China, the Philippines, Polynesia. The Polynesians navigated by celestial navigation, by using stars. And I wish I could tell you that Filipinos navigated by stars. And you know, sometimes I'm like, should I just lie and say, Filipinos navigated by stars? Well, everything we know suggests that they did not. But you know, sometimes I feel like saying it. We know that the Polynesians did. And let me just tell you how incredible this is. Polynesians would leave Tahiti, sail in a certain direction, see no land for 10 days, and on the 10th day they will hit Hawaii. If you sail, all I can say is that is, you know, incredible sailing skills. Filipinos navigated using the clouds, the currents, and the swells. They can tell what these clouds mean. They can tell what these currents mean. They can tell whether land is near and the like. And Filipinos, by and large, used line of sight navigation. And I'll show you a graphic of that. You know, they will see a mountain, and even though it'll take 2 days to go to that mountain, as long as they headed in that direction, they know they will get there eventually, okay? And so they also use birds and fish, and let me give you a good example. If you're out in the deep ocean, there ain't no fishes out in the deep blue ocean, okay? The kind of fish that you'll find there are gigantic fish like tuna and the like. Most of the little fish are closer to land. Also, if you look at birds, you know in the daytime, birds are leaving land. They're heading out to the ocean. And then at night, if you see a bird or a flock of birds, you know they're heading towards land. And so those are some of the very simple things that these Polynesian navigators, including Filipinos, utilized. I already mentioned about Lapu-Lapu, the warriors who defeated Magellan and repelled colonization for 40 years. And then, so let me just show you some comparisons, okay? So here's the line of sight navigation. This is the Batanes Island in northern Philippines. On a clear day, you can see the mountains of Taiwan. And so Filipinos knew if they sailed here, they will hit Taiwan. And if they sail in this direction, they know in 2 to 3 days, they will hit the shoreline of China. And it's the same thing from the Philippines, from the Mindanao area. They know that they just island hop until they get all the way to Brunei, Malaysia, and the like. And over here, they can island hop again, line of sight navigation, until they get to Indonesia. So I'm going to go through these real quick. Here are other examples of societies that are also seafaring societies. The ancient Greeks had the trireme. This is a trireme, and it has the same number of crew, 200. The Vikings, with their long ship, same thing. Actually the Viking is very, very similar to Filipino society. I want to show you an artist depiction of Filipinos when Magellan landed in the Philippines. And when Magellan saw these folks, he was very excited, because the Europeans sailed the ocean blue not because they were brilliant and spectacular. In fact, when Magellan and Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the most advanced civilization on the planet were Asians, particularly China. And in fact, when the Chinese sent out their exploratory fleets, the Chinese were very disappointed in the world. The only country they thought, not even a country, the only region they thought that was worthy of mention and worthy of communication was Africa. But the rest of the places that they've seen, including the Europeans that they met, did not impress them. Anyway, Magellan was very impressed because this Filipino guy, was wearing silk garments. He had gold, and they were like, wow, we're in China, okay? And this woman here is the same thing. You know, they had silk garments, and they're like, we must be in China. Then Magellan really got excited when they fed him food, because the food was delivered in porcelain bowls. So bananas, rice, and fish were delivered in porcelain bowls. By this time, the Europeans did not have the technology to create porcelain. So Magellan was very convinced that he, in fact, has reached the area where China is, or close to it. The warship again. And today in Polynesia and in the Philippines, there is a resurgence of this ancient craft of seamanship. And Filipinos built a replica of this boat called a balangay. A balangay is not a warship. The warship is the Karakoa. The balangay is the regular ship that regular people will travel in. So it is postulated that it is on these ships that Filipinos island hopped from Indonesia, Malaysia, to the Philippines. But perhaps the folks that are doing the most incredible research on this are Polynesians. And this is the Pacific Voyagers website. In fact, this summer, 7 of these ships sailed from New Zealand through Tonga, through the Cook Islands, through Fiji, through Tahiti, to Hawaii, and all the way from Hawaii here in San Francisco. So to give you a sense of what this must feel like, I'm going to show you a short clip from the Pacific Voyagers, and this is from their webpage.
Very spiritual journey for us. You know, it's a huge statement and a huge honor to our forefathers.
So that is the vision that I see when I do research in this area. And actually, I've had the good fortune to actually help build one of these ships. Even though I'm Filipino, I grew up actually speaking Chamorro besides Ilonggo and Tagalog. And in 2008, I was invited by Guam to be their humanities scholar and deliver a series of lectures in Guam. And while I was there, I worked on one of these vessels. So in Guam, it's called a proa, and the Chamorros have lost the ability to build these ships and to navigate. So what they did is they got some run from Pulawat, and this is the guy there with the white shirt, this guy right here. His name is Manny Sicao, and these are the incredible people that can sail for 10 days and then hit land on the 10th day. So in the summer, these vakas from New Zealand, from the Cook Islands, from Fiji, from Tonga, from Tahiti, and of course from Hawaii, they sailed all the way, as you saw, 20,000 miles, using ancient navigational methods, and they made it to San Francisco. And so, of course, since I sail, I had to make sure I go and wave at them and all that. So this is Alcatraz, and these are one of the vakas. Just a little connection here. The vakas are double-hulled canoes. And Filipinos, they were single-hulled canoes with two outriggers on the back. And then, you know, my wife pointed this out. I didn't even see it. I mean, I'm a scholar, and I didn't even see it. What is the Filipino term for boat in the Philippines? Okay, it's bangka, right? Now, look at, we went from bangka to vaca. Okay, pretty cool, huh? So anyway, this is the modern-day bangka, and they maintain their structure and the like. Okay, so now let's fast forward, because this is supposed to bring us to how martial arts and particularly the contributions that Sergeant Garon did. Filipinos came here first in the 16th century, and it even says there, 16th century, as part of the Manila galleon trade. And let me look at that trade. It is through the Manila galleon trade that the first documented Asians arrived in the United States. Now, there are many claims that there were Chinese monks that came here. There are many claims that Japanese sailors washed ashore and came here. And those claims may very well be true. But notice how I articulate this. This is the first documented Asians. That means you can go here at California State Library and look at the writings of this crew members, and you can see there it says ochos indios Filipinos, 8 indios, okay, ochos indios Luzones, 8 indios from Luzon, and you can verify that. So as a scholar, we like to make a distinction between what people theorized and what you can verify. And as I said, this is something that you can verify. Unfortunately for Filipinos, we came into contact with the United States when the United States was at the height of racism. And during the Philippine-American War, and that war commenced 1 year after the end of the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War was in 18 98, and 1 year later, in 1899, we have the Filipino-American War. And unfortunately, the United States was at the height of racism when contact with the Philippines occurred. So they used the same racially discriminatory language against Filipinos. And here is what one Nebraska volunteer said when he testified in Congress in terms of why the war broke out. And he said, well, we saw Filipinos. They didn't stop when we said alto, because Filipinos spoke Spanish at that time. So we fired at them, and they fired back. And then I yelled, line up, fellows. The N-words are here all through these yards. And so you can see the same kind of racial constructions and racial language being used against Filipinos. Now, I will say that the majority of the African Americans served the Americans loyally, but I will also let you know that some African Americans got so incensed that Filipinos were called the N-word just like them at home, that they defected to the Filipino side and fired and fought against the Americans. And the most famous one of them is a guy named Sergeant Fagan, okay, who actually received a commission in Aguinaldo's Revolutionary Army. In any event, you know, the war would end, and if you are a Californian from Northern California, and you go to San Francisco, you can look at the Dewey Monument, which commemorates the 1898 Spanish-American War. And this is to commemorate, in fact, the spectacular victory that the United States had in the war. And with this war, the United States will be propelled into the ranks of superpowerdom. Prior to this war, the United States was a third-rate military power. And overnight, they will become a first-rate military power when they defeated the Spaniards in this war. Okay, so quick immigration history here. The majority of Filipinos pre-1965 will come either through Hawaii, through California, or Guam. I am of the Guam route. My father was a contract worker. He was a contract worker for the United States Navy. And many Filipinos that you meet here will come through Hawaii or come directly to California via Seattle. So these are the three areas pre-1965. They're mostly, of course, agricultural or labor contract workers. So this migration will continue through the 1920s and 30s. And this is, in fact, how Sergeant Leo Garon will come here. Sergeant Leo Garon will arrive in Stockton, and we're going to get to that slide real quick. But let me just give you a breakdown of how Filipinos, where in the labor sector they are. The first thing I should let you know is Filipinos had a very special status. They were called nationals. The Supreme Court ruled in 1904 that Filipinos are U.S. nationals. That's a fancy word for saying they are subjects of the United States. And although it's a negative term, it actually afforded them some privileges. So they can come here freely without needing a visa or a passport. 80% of Filipinos in the mainland United States worked in agriculture in places like Stockton, Salinas, Monterey, and San Joaquin Valley, and of course up here too in the Sacramento Valley. There were mostly single, able-bodied men, and the remaining percentage who did not work in agriculture worked in the domestic service sector, and these folks worked in San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles. And in the summer, when the agricultural season is over, they would go to Alaska and work in the fish canneries. Okay? So here's a famous picture by Dorothea Lang of Filipinos working in the asparagus fields, and this is asparagus over here. And this one here is an Alaska cannery. We actually visited an Alaska cannery in Kenai, Alaska, and this is these things are called hooligans, and I don't know why they're called hooligans, but they taste good is all I can tell you about them. When we were in San Francisco last week, Oscar Peñaranda was honored also as an honorary brother, and I include his photo here. So again, here is the asparagus fields, and this one is on Zuckerman Farm. And it is in 1926 that Sergeant Leo Garon finds himself arriving in California as a young 15-year-old. So remember, this lecture is in commemoration of Filipino-American History Month. And so, although we know him as a martial artist and a World War II hero, when we look at his life, we see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is he arrived here as a 15-year-old from the Philippines. He eventually worked in the asparagus fields in Stockton. He learned Eskrima when he was in the Philippines, and then he will continue his Eskrima, Arnis, Kali training when he gets here. And eventually he will join a fraternal organization, and you know this is sponsored by XPO, so the fraternal organization there is really important to acknowledge. He joined the Legionarios del Trabajo in 1937, and as I mentioned, he worked as a farm worker, trained in the fields until World War II, and so that's what we're going to make our transition to. This is a reenactment. These guys are not old, they're actually in their 40s or thereabouts. But it was a nice picture, so we included it. So now on to the regiment. When World War II occurred, Filipinos were actually not allowed to join the U.S. Army. So it's really important for me to identify the important role of a Filipina. Her name is Pasita Tudtud, and she organized a letter-writing campaign to allow Filipinos to be recruited in the U.S. Army, to join the U.S. Army. So they petitioned the Secretary of War, Henry Stinson, and eventually President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed an executive order that allowed Filipinos to serve in the military. But the Filipinos will serve as a segregated unit. So Filipinos here will have that experience in common with African Americans, in common with Japanese Americans. Mexicans, on the other hand, and Chinese were allowed to serve in integrated units in the Army. Okay? She eventually became a community leader and film actor in Hollywood. But let's go look at what she helped bring together. So with the executive order that allowed Filipinos to join the U.S. Army, we had a unit formed in Camp San Luis Obispo. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Offley, and one of his most memorable traits is that he spoke passable Filipino, he spoke passable Tagalog. Eventually, the battalion became so large it reached regimental strength. And when it reached regimental strength, they split it up into two units, the 1st and 2nd Filipino infantry regiments. The 1st Filipino Infantry Regiment was in Camp Beale, the 2nd one was in Camp Cook. Now the crucial thing to know here is Filipinos who joined the Army were given citizenship rights because, as students know in my class, the 1790 Naturalization Act only allowed free white persons to become citizens of the United States. So although I'm not a big fan of, racism, the all white people are bad, I'm not actually a big fan of that. I want to know why why white people became racist and the like. And one of the things that I point to is, if you're going to make that argument, give me the data. And the strongest data for the view that the United States was founded only for white people is the 1790 Naturalization Act. And so here, Filipinos, like other non-whites, were not allowed to be given citizenship rights, and eventually these Filipinos who served in the military were given citizenship rights. Pasita Tudtud, when they interviewed her in, I think, 2005 or thereabouts, actually it's 2005. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to shift to a PBS documentary and show you that documentary of Sergeant Leo Garon. It's called The Untold Triumph, and it was actually broadcasted nationwide, and we were very lucky because the documentary was actually filmed in our home. So here we go. Oops.
Nat, he says, well, if there's any demolition to done, where's my demolition? So right here, sir. He says, come here and I got a good view. They told us that this was going to be the advanced group on MacArthur. We got to be the eyes and ears now. We got to do this right
Viewers of the documentary will learn that General MacArthur's secret plan to retake the Philippines would require secret operatives to go behind enemy lines. He found these operatives in California, among the men of the U.S. Army's 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry Regiments.
I was ordered to go to headquarters. I said, the old man wants to talk to us. You are who? Sergeant Leo Hiram. Sit down, this is the boy I want to talk to. This is my son. You are going there to the Philippines to tell me what you saw. Tell me what the Japanese are doing. Tell me how big or how strong they are. Tell me if they're young or old.
In small teams, hundreds of these U.S. Filipinos were smuggled into the Philippines by submarines. In their 2 years undercover, and under the constant threat of death, these secret mission men set up more than 100 radio transmission centers and coast-watching stations for General MacArthur. Their triumphs set the stage for his successful return.
So I wanted to show you that to kind of give you a feeling of what he did. This is a mass swearing ceremony for Filipinos who served in the military. Now, to a little bit of connection to the martial arts aspect. One of the things that you know, we've learned, and I've learned in doing research on this, is that Filipinos were actually taught in these U.S. Army camps Filipino bladed weapon fighting. And this is a very good example. They're using 2 bolos, and later on in the demo we're actually going to show blades. None of our blades, by the way, are sharp because, you know, that's just wise. Right?